Sorry, our laptop is like muted for some reason. We're just trying to fix that.
Okie dokie.
Oh, okay. Okay.
All right. Is everyone ready to go? No one's waiting on anyone? Okay, cool. We're all ready to go.
Cool. Kia ora, everyone. I'm the only adjudicator. I'm Sam, and my pronouns are he, him pronouns.
Hi, my name is John B. I'm the first speaker. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, my name is Gabriel. I'm the second speaker as well as reply. My pronouns are he, him.
Hi, I'm Adi. I'm the third speaker for affirming. My pronouns are also he, him.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm the first speaker of the debating team. My pronouns are she, her.
My name is Levi. I do second and reply. My pronouns are he, him.
Hi, I'm Janet. I'm the third speaker. Pronouns are she, her.
You are muted.
Sorry. Okay. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So what is the world we want in affirming? At the affirming side, we want a world where the playing field is level. We want a world where everyone, a big person, like a really famous person, a smaller person from like a small community, a rich person, a poor person, everyone has the same shot at becoming famous and successful. We want a world where you don't have to be dominated by record label companies running like an oligopoly in the industry, right? So on our side of the house, we oppose record labels, both side affirming. So in this debate, if we prove that record labels are no longer a necessary evil in this industry and how we benefit the artists and the industry as a whole on our side, then we win this debate. So what does this actually look like, right? We see that record labels used to be a necessary evil in our world. So they were like never an ideal solution, right? We see that before the internet was existing, there was no other way for like artists to become known. There was no other way for them to become big. So basically they just had like the record labels had an inefficient oligopoly running in this industry, right? So record labels then were able to take the rights to everything that these artists produce. They were able to control the content and the brand of these artists, including like appearance and clothing. And thirdly, they were able to take a lot of the profits that these artists actually generate, right? And what was this? This was in exchange for like marketing and promotion, and to help record the music and facilitate the production of the content of these artists. And for all of these exploitative reasons, we as the Affirming House oppose the need for record labels because we just simply don't need them anymore. So in this debate, I'm going to bring you two substantive points. The first one about the harms of having record labels in the music industry, and the second one about how we are able to even the playing field without them. And my second speaker, Gabe, will bring you a split point about the impact on individual artists. So on to my first substantive point. What are the harms we get in a world where we actually have record labels, right? We see like a world where there's exploitative tendencies, right? We see harms to artists and we see harms to industries in three ways. Firstly, we see that record labels, because they're able to like maintain a monopoly over the resources and the promotional networks they need to be, the artists actually need to be successful in the music industry. These artists, they have no choice but to sign with these record labels, and they have to accept like the terms and conditions that come as well as working with these record label companies, right? And essentially, these record label companies end up having a chokehold on these artists. So this actually harms them in three ways. Firstly, they own the rights to all of their content, right? Your songs, the songs that these artists produce, they're not actually owned by you, but in fact, they become owned by the record labels. And all of the songs, like even though you write them, you don't actually own them. And this means that you can't do what you want with these songs, but the artists, the record labels are able to like do exactly what they want. They're able to delete them, they're able to sell them, even though this was your song and your music that you've produced. And it just overall becomes theirs, which creates like an exploitative nature, and it just harms like the artistic integrity of the entire music industry, because these artists, they essentially become machines where they produce all this music, they write all this music, and what actually happens, these record labels end up owning, controlling everything that happens in terms of these in terms of this music, because you have no choice and no other way to become famous, because these record labels run a monopoly in this industry. So then why is this actually bad, right? Well, everything just becomes a commercial facade to make the most money possible, rather than like we have authentic artists coming out and there's no actual real talent coming out. And these artists just become pawns in the industry. And the second mechanism for this is that these artists, these record labels are essentially able to just take the profits, right? We see that the artists should be entitled to like the product of their own labor. Whereas what actually happens is these record labels end up taking a lot of this money. And overall, like we just see that the artists should deserve the money that they actually earn for their talents. But these artists are instead getting used for their work, and they don't actually get much of the money from it. And the third mechanism is how it basically just harms the overall industry when we have record labels. Well, we talked about how record labels are no longer a necessary evil in this industry, right? Record labels, they basically control access to the entire music industry, because they have like an artificial high power to decide who they actually want to make famous, right? Based on like who becomes the most money-making machine. These corporate executives basically are able to choose who they want to make the most money for them, not based on talent, but based on who's going to be the most like financially like generating enough money for them. These record labels, their incentive is essentially to make money. They want to exploit these like artists so that they can make enough money for themselves. And they want to do this based on who's actually profitable, not actually based on pure talent. So overall, the entire music industry is just controlled by like money hungry executives. And it just becomes an overall exploitative nature, which we don't want. I'll take a POI now if you have one.
Is authenticity not marketable? Was Taylor Swift not marketable because she was a country girl who rose and was supported by a record label?
Right, but when Taylor Swift was supported by a record label, she had all of these harms that I already talked about, right? She basically had to like, she didn't have the rights to anything that she owned. She was basically controlled. Her brand, her entire content was owned. And we just see that she was overall harmed, and the overall music industry was harmed more than she was actually benefited. She could have done much better if like we oppose record labels. And this brings me to my second point. What does the world look like when we actually oppose these record labels, right? We see that it basically evens out the playing field, and this happens in two ways. Firstly, it removes the oligopolist structure of the music industry, right? We see that there's like success is based on like pure talent as an artist, and instead like all artists, they have to compete in the same playing field to actually showcase their talents. How? Because there's no more gatekeepers in this industry, which we actually see as these record labels. They're not there like gatekeeping and choosing who they can push to become famous, who they want to pour all their resources into, who they think are going to make them the most money. And instead like the world has to focus on who's actually like purely talented, right? These record labels have like exclusive access to tools that make artists famous. They're able to like easily make bookings. They're easily able to access promotional material. They just have like increasing connections. And we think that they're using this to basically promote who's going to make the most money. And it just becomes like an uneven playing field for everyone, for all the other artists who have like a lot of potential, but don't get seen because for this reason. So by opposing the record labels, everyone now has access to all the tools and resources required to become famous. Everyone has the same resources, so everyone has to become famous by themselves, and it's just purely based on talents, because now the audience actually gets to decide and pick the people they want on top of their Spotify playlist, instead of like the executives pushing who they like instead, right? We see that it helps like smaller artists be chosen for pure talent, and it removes gatekeepers and artists connected like and the artists become like directly connected to the audience, and it makes it just an overall even playing field, and everyone has the same chance of getting recognized. And the second thing is that how everyone has to use the same resources to become famous. No one has access to a fast track based on like their richness or their poorness. Just everyone has to go through the same pathway to become famous, right? We see that all of these artists have to go through the same route, because no one has access to things like extra promotion and extra just help from these record labels, who are, by the way, also going to exploit them. And everyone has the same chance to become famous based on pure talent, because they have to promote themselves by themselves based on like TikTok and YouTube and other means of like marketing just themselves. And artists then don't have to like face the consequences that also come with working with a record label when you sign with them, which we just see as a really positive thing, because they end up getting the full profits for everything that they earn. They also end up preventing anyone from controlling their brand, controlling who they are, controlling how they function, how their music gets like sold and put out in the industry, and they just don't get exploited in this industry. So overall, we gave everyone in the music industry like a fair chance, and just overall it becomes like a more efficient industry that produces like a safe space for all artists, and everyone has an even playing field to become famous, which is why the move should stand.
Awesome. I thank the speaker very much for their speech. I now invite up the first negating speaker to open their team's case.
All right, we've got a couple of spectators. The live stream is working, so you can just go watch that. But if you are going to stay, could you please just mute yourselves?
Okay, sweet. Don't want to make a mistake again.
Levi forgot to unmute last time.
Thank you.
As lost today's debate, we may believe that the music industry will become an equal playing field via the removal of record labels. What is our path to victory in today's debate? Firstly, that we need to prove that the record label industry has had a positive influence on the music industry, but secondly, that we still are able to support these artists. What about points to enable us to do that? Firstly, we'll be discussing how we support artists. Secondly, why we get more meaningful and better music under our side of the house. And Levi will split and tell you about the independence of artists. Before that, what we support. We support that the music industry is accessible in quantity and quality for both the creator and the consumer of music. Secondly, we support that record labels are large and have resources, which means they're able to scout for new talent and are incentivized to do so to keep their brand relevant. Because as we heard from AF, they are profit driven, which will prove in our first sub. But we overall believe that the record labels are fundamental to the thriving of the music industry. What does it look like when we don't have a world where record labels exist? It looks like more decentralized music productions. Artists don't get big contracts, and so are not incentivized to try and go into this industry because they think that there is a lack of money making in there for them, which means that everyone is now an indie artist. But secondly, we see that you get less mainstream and pop icons, and which means that they've got less influence to have over people. Now onto some rebuttal. Essentially, the two major pushes that we heard from affirming was firstly that record labels are not necessary and they're just exploitative. But we tell you that if they are so terrible and we've had the capacity and ability to move away from them, surely we would have done it by now. Surely we would have taken that shift already, because the artists know they're being exploited. They hear this in the news if like this is so prominent. So therefore, why would they keep putting themselves at further harms? But we'll also discuss why that is super not relevant throughout our case. But secondly, they really had this massive push that the music industry will now be accessible to all. But this is not true because of people's wealth inequality, right? People who have family connections and are backgrounds of like higher socioeconomic backgrounds means that they're going to have more accessibility to music studios and to places which allow them to produce better quality music, which is most likely going to be more widely received. Or even just their like social influence, right? Like someone like Kim Kardashian, who made it like big just through being, I don't know, like a social icon, has going to have like a comparative advantage over someone that nobody knows about, which is why it's still not fair. Moving on to our first point, which is how we support artists. We need to prove that the existence and prominence of record labels as a whole benefits artists. So how do we prove this? Firstly, it's much more difficult to have a music career when the artist has to worry about the admin of their career. So, for example, like managing their own gigs or self-promotions. Part A of this is that record labels have a unique capacity to provide good managers and promotions. They're big, they've got experiences, they're established. But secondly, they have contacts due to their prominence within the music industry. And thirdly, they've most likely got good managers because that's what they need to succeed. And they want their artists to succeed because at the end of the day, it is an investment for them and it needs to be profitable. Which leads me on to the part B of this, as the incentive is that the record label wants the artist to succeed because of their return on their investment, which directly interacts with their facade of just like the whatever the word is, of just making money, right? We tell you that they're going to provide ways to allow the artists to focus on the production of the music because they want them to make money. But part C of this is it's important as it allows the artists to invest time and effort and focusing their creative energy into music. The impacting of this is that it means they're able to advance their own career through connections made in the music industry. It's all about who you know, and you will know people who are part of the same label as you. Why is this? Because the entertainment is subjective to progressing the industry. People have to like you, have to be part of the product. Having connections make you much more likable, which means you're going to move forward. But the second impact is that artists aren't likely to cling onto their dreams of making it big, and they have to worry about excessive admin, which means and so outside the house, they're more willing to try as they feel more supported. The next kind of part of this point is that you've got many talent seekers and like people like scouts who can find these really niche people, right? That's how Taylor Swift got discovered, because the record label was so big and has an incentive to try and find all of these new music people. They're trying to browse the niches of the wider music industry, which means that record labels sell artists' stories, right? When they brought on Taylor Swift from some small country town, they know they can claim supporting like smaller young artists, and this looks really good for their public image, which is why they're likely to keep people doing that. Long term, it makes the artists feel more independent because record labels build them up in terms of their name, value, and public image, which persists past the record deal. But the record label lowers the barrier of entry to the music industry. And the next part of this point is that we help innovate and we help innovative and experimental artists because of the first mover advantage, right? Which basically means you're the first to produce the product, so you get to like ride the wave and have the claim to fame of producing that trailblazer, which is why you want to try and find new people, and you're not going to get stuck into your like same cycle of just recycling artists because they're going to become irrelevant. But secondly, you've got like more of a you've got less of a you've got more like there's a moral hazard with thingy companies because they've got a capacity to take risks. It means that they can survive if their investment into an artist goes wrong because of their share side, because they've got so many other people, but which means they're more likely to invest into the new talent. Yes, I'll take a point now.
Okay, so you mentioned repeatedly the Taylor Swift example. So do you believe it's ethically correct for small artists such as Taylor Swift, who often have no choice, to be locked into lifelong contracts where they have to give up the majority of their profits?
We tell you that it's actually not a lifelong contract. That's a really like bad assertion. But secondly, we tell you that with that contract, that's how she got her platform, right? Without that, she'd be still staying in her same little country town, producing music to her same small audience. We've allowed her to expand her audience and to share her story, which allows for accountability of these record labels. Moving on to our second point, which is why we get more meaningful and better music. We need to prove that the record labels allows their signed artists' voices and messages to be heard because the record label has influence over the music industry. But secondly, record labels enable artists to write more meaningful music. How do we prove this? Firstly, people like meaningful music. This is obviously really important just to underpin the case, but people like meaningful music because A, as a society evolves, people have become more liberal and socially aware. It looks like having school strikes for climate. It looks like having Black Lives Matter protests. So part B of this is therefore people want their music to be centered around exposing flaws in the system, especially due to how widely received music is and the variety of the audience, because they know that is their key to accessing more social change. But like we tell you that even if you're just writing about about breakups, this still provides emotional support and is still meaningful. And as we're going to prove, it's like more, it's better on outside of the house because you get more exposure. Part two of this is that the record label wants to appeal to public and demand, and therefore they want their artists to use their point of personal voices and won't hinder them from writing about social justice movements on personal experience. So this is, we tell you that like the artists are likely to write about these things because they write about what they know. When they've been plagued by police brutality all of their life, it's most likely that is what's going to be reflected in their songs. But secondly, when they write what they care about, they've got a deeper emotional connection, which is expanded through music because it is such an extremely emotional medium and people connect to the song, so they want it to be connectful. But part B of this is even if the music isn't widely received well, for example, like This Is America, the company still gets media attention because of this. So some people will listen to the song for the message, other people will listen to hate on it, but either way, the song is getting listened to, which means it's profitable for you because you're getting downloads. The outcome of the meaningful music means that people are more educated around social justice issues because when you listen to the song over and over again via the radio, via liking it, so you want to learn the lyrics and you want to sing along, either subconsciously or consciously, you're absorbing these ideas, which creates more awareness, and then people then have a capacity to enact change because they know about the issue and they are more educated. It looks like Tupac writing about women's rights. But secondly, in like the case of just like writing about breakups, people feel supported and not alone in their struggles. It validates their experience, which probably allows them to speak out because they know they're not the only one experiencing this. But also because this is like more mutually exclusive because the record label is so big, we've got a wider audience and we've got more exposure, which is very important to know because we think that what you're being exposed to is extremely important. This is why I'm extremely proud to propose.
Awesome. I thank the speaker very much for that speech. I now invite up the second affirming speaker to continue their team's case.
Am I muted? Okay, thank you. No, I'm genuinely scared that I'm still muted. Okay. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We tell you that Neg loses this debate immediately when there are only 2 lines of response throughout an entire case is that we would have moved away from record labels immediately if there was already access to it. And secondly, that because of the wealth and equality of the debate, that a lot of people would inevitably make better music as a whole, right? We tell you that those 2 lines of responses is not enough to entirely knock down John V's case in this debate. And we tell you that we win for two contentions in this debate. Firstly, the first contention on how we actually manage to support the artist more, and second, which side of the house better makes meaningful music on this side of the debate, right? Let's go into the first one, which is how we manage to support the artist, right? Which side is better able to support the artist? We get 2 kind of claims from negating it this way. We tell you that it's difficult to manage your own team and your own music, and that's why record labels are such an essential and quintessential part of the music label because of the fact that it allows for the artist to relieve them of their stresses and allows for them to focus on their own creativity when producing music, right? But when we tell you that these sorts of things is not enough to weigh out a lot of the things, right? We tell you that they brought up an example of Taylor Swift, right? And they tell us that Taylor Swift was able to focus on her creativity, on her music, and that that a lot of her stresses were relieved because of the fact that she was signed to a label. But what I feel like they failed to understand is that Taylor Swift was one of the most incredibly manipulated and exploited artists out there in the world, right? We tell you that a lot of the profits that she made didn't even go to her, even though she had huge successes in the industry, right? We tell you as well that a lot of her brand was controlled and that she made an album, Reputation, that didn't go well, and that had a huge severe impact on her mental health, right? And lastly, we tell you that a lot of the stuff that she produced didn't even own and belong to her, and that is why she started creating music with Taylor's version on it, because that's actual content that she owns herself, right? We tell you that when she was manipulated and produced by the record label, we tell you that a lot of negative impacts actually happen to Taylor Swift, right? So when their only example in this debate is actually one of the most manipulated and exploited people in this debate, they don't actually win on that point. We tell you that there are a lot of people who actually don't need record labels in order to make it big. We tell you that artists such as Shawn Mendes, Doja Cat, Justin Bieber were able to make huge successes and made a huge impact and be able to be seen in mainstream media without record labels, right? So a lot of the claims on saying that that record labels will be able to get you a huge garnered mainstream media is just completely not false and a complete assertion in this debate, right? We then tell you that their second mechanism that scouts would be able to find niche people doesn't actually exist, right? We tell you that a lot of audiences are able to find their own niche audience, their own niche music tastes. We see a lot of SoundCloud rappers are able to garner quite a bit of success because of the fact that they have their own niche companies, right? But they're not mainstream people who are signed to a record label, right? They have profits that they're able to make because they're able to control how much money they're making. They have the ability to control their own brand, and they actually own everything that they produce. Whereas on their side of the house, you create a huge manipulative industry where a lot of people, such as Taylor Swift, who they love so dearly, has been exploited, right? So then, what do we then get on their second? So how do we on our side of the house then get support the artists, right? We tell you that John V created this entire. We gave you an entire case that artists would be able to support themselves, and we got a slight rebuttal on this, saying that because a lot more people would be able, a lot more people have a lot more wealth, and there would be some inequality because then they would be able to create better music, right? We tell you that is a completely false assertion in this debate. We tell you that Doja Cat used to actually make music in her own basement, and she's still now one of the biggest artists in this debate. So obviously, wealth is not a huge factor on being able to make it into the mainstream media. But then we tell you in this debate that even so, audiences would still be able to find their own artists and support their own artists that they like, because genuine talent is actually going to become the forefront, right? We tell you that at first affirmative immediately that genuine talent would become the focus when we get rid of music labels, because corporate executives aren't the ones who are controlling or deciding who is going to be at the spotlight, right? We tell you that audiences are going to be the ones who will be able to choose who is at the forefront of the mainstream media, and that way you actually are able to support the artist. I'll take that in a second. But when we tell you this, that you're able to get this without record labels, we tell you that we oppose record labels for the sole fact that they exploit a lot of artists in this debate, especially small artists who aren't getting their mainstream success because those specific record labels themselves aren't pushing them, even though they're incredibly talented people in this debate, right? We tell you that a lot of the deciding factor on who's mainstream media is who's the most marketable, right? And we tell you that these people are not the ones who are most talented. We tell you that that's the audience's choice to decide who is the most talented, who is the most genuine, not the corporate executives. I'll take the PO now.
When the money made by a song is decided by the number of streams, how is the audience not deciding under our side of the house in terms of how much money,
because they're under contractual obligations where a lot of their money is now being sent to the record labels themselves. You sign a contract in exchange for marketing and promotion and facilitating the production of your content. You obviously have to give up some of your profits in order to make sure that the music label themselves has the actual profit, right? No one in their right sense would just give up stuff for free. They're obviously in there to make a profit, which is something first negating acknowledged in their debate, right? Which is why we win, how we're able to better support the artists on our side of the house, getting rid of one of their paths to victories in this debate. Moving on to the second point of clash in this debate, which is how which side of the house is able to make more meaningful music, right? We are told that in this debate that people like meaningful music because it exposes the flaws in the system, and because of deeper emotional connections, such as This Is America, a lot of people would stream and listen to that music because it's something that they relate to, right? We tell you that, yeah, you have some relationship in you have some meaningful music on their side of the house, but we tell you that we get more meaningful music on our side of the house for following reasons, right? We tell you, and this is where my split actually comes in, right? We tell you that because the label has a huge grip on the artist, right? They have control of their brand, their production rights, their profits, it's mentally taxing to the artists, right? And how do we know that it's mentally taxing, right? Because they have no control over their own brand, right? They have to act certain ways and have to do certain things. And this is something they're obligated to do because of their contract obligation, right? You get signed to a record label, you have to sign a contract. That way they have their rights over you, right? And we tell you that even if you break that contract, you're just removed from the industry as a whole. And thus you get less profits from your own blood, sweat, and tears. You're not getting 100% of your own profits. There's less payoff, and you actually have no control over your own work, right? You're used in something that you do. A lot of content that you're producing is used in something that you don't support yourself. You just become another corporate machine when you're a small artist or a big artist, right? We tell you that this is really bad and doesn't actually create meaningful music on their side of the house because of the fact that it's creating marketable songs, not songs that are actually meaningful, right? We tell you that songs that like This Is America, which they provide in this debate, actually got censored on the radio because it was not something that was marketable, right? It wasn't marketable for the label, therefore it wasn't shown on the radio, right? So therefore, you might make meaningful music, but it's not going to be shown to the group that they want to show it to, right? Secondly, then, if you don't make good quality music, right? There are two things, right? You either have to make marketable songs, which is something what happened to Taylor Swift with the Reputation album, which was a garbage album. And second of all, we tell you that you get kicked out of the industry because of the fact you're not producing sales and you don't become big, which is what your dreams is. We want to support artists on our side of the house. Vote for side affirming.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the second negating speaker to continue their team's case.
Am I audible? Negating? It does not matter if side affirming can convince you today that they get artists getting 100% of the profit from their product. Because the reality is that does not matter if you get significantly less profit for those artists. It does not matter if they can come out here and assert to you that these industries and these contracts are exploitative when they give no indication of what that looks like. And we give you numerous benefits that these things can provide. They concede to us at first when they tell us that these types of industries have such a massive control over resources, only to later go back on this and tell us that people can be independent. There's no clarity in what their case is trying to prove. That is why they lose today. 3 things, though, I'll be doing in my speech. Firstly, on how we help smaller artists. Secondly, on how we help the wider music industry. And thirdly, I'll be splitting more on artist independence. Firstly, then, on helping smaller artists, okay? On the idea of helping like indie artists and those like smaller groups rise up, okay? We think that even if there is some sort of inequality or the uneven playing field, aside of negating Side affirming has characterized from the start, we think that this is actually like not that much of a problem for a variety of reasons. Firstly, we say that large firms have an incentive and capacity to seek out strong local talent because those types of stories are easy to sell on an international scale. That is how Taylor Swift was able to sell because the country girl turned international pop star. Secondly, we say they have an incentive to go into those untapped markets because there's a first mover's advantage to go into innovative music industries and to get those local talents, and they have a capacity to take those risks because they operate on such a large scale. We say thirdly that indie music still has a strong following as well, and they seem to concede this when they talk about indie artists that have had success. We don't see why record labels therefore make this such an act of harm. We fourthly say that there are other ways for these indie music people to succeed. And we actually say that it's more beneficial to have record labels because the label of being indie only means something if not everyone is indie, right? Okay. And if not, if you are unable to succeed in the music industry, regardless of whether or not there is a record label there, it's probably because your music is pretty suboptimal anyway. So that doesn't necessarily matter. Okay. What we're left in is this question of two questions on side of affirming's case. Firstly, on what does its exploitation look like? What we've heard is that these giant record labels will be taking some of the profit from businesses, but from artists. As I'll tell you later in my speech, we think it's actually more important that Taylor Swift can make $20 million and maybe lose $2 million from that and still become a multimillionaire due to the marketing machine that is these giant record labels. The second question we're left with is how does a small artist get access to all of those connections on side affirming? The reality is that they don't. They don't because you don't have those talent seekers looking in those niche areas. You don't have these large firms operating on a wider scale, even if the resources are still centralized. What you get is this, what you get on site affirming in reality is that people are only getting signed if they're in those local areas where these smaller types of labels, where these smaller management teams can sign talent, and where people are only getting that limited exposure because there isn't that wider scale marketing, there isn't that wider scale advertising of a product to an audience. That is why they lose on this point. We also ask again, because they present to us at first a suggestion that there is a variety of other outlets for people to succeed and that record labels are therefore outdated. We therefore question, what does an artist who doesn't have access to those modern things like the internet, which we have to presume this is probably referring to, look like, okay? It means that they don't get any opportunity to say rise from a favela where a giant bloody record label is probably going to go there because if you can make someone from a poorer background into a star, that sells, that makes oh so much money, but that's actually impossible when you're relying on things like the internet, right? We also say, secondly on this point, I have not organized this, on the idea of monopolization and profiteering and exploitation. Okay, we say firstly that firms have an incentive to treat artists well because they want to appeal to them and get them to sign. Given that there's no actual explanation of what that exploitation looks like, it's hard to see how any of this is actually occurring under the status quo. Secondly, we say that record labels still compete. The fact that the motion mentions more than 2 record labels is indicated that this is not a monopoly because a monopoly refers to one firm and therefore that power is limited. There's still that competition to create appeal. If someone is really, really damn good, then record labels are going to look for them and record labels are going to give them a good contract and a fair cut. Thirdly, we say a record label is incentivized to not exploit artists and a variety of other reasons, right? If you sign a multi-million-dollar contract and your music gets out there and you get this name value built up and this brand value in the long term, that is a benefit to you. If you lose $2 million in the process to go towards funding that advertising that is being done for people so you don't have to, that's still a net benefit to you as an artist. Fourthly, if we now don't need record labels, as they say at first, why do people have to sign with them, as you assert? Getting all the profit from a song doesn't matter if you get significantly less profit. Not everyone is going to be Doja Cat. Not everyone is going to be able to rise up as an independent artist. We simply give them another avenue, which is enough to win us this point. Fifthly, then, on the idea of music being changed and made more uniform. We say that, firstly, that people have an incentive to make and keep an authentic quality product because that is what sells, as I already explained. And there's no reason to say sign a revolutionary artist with all of these talents that you've been able to find because you have these talent seekers and try and turn them into a generic pop queen in the process, because that isn't going to get you that first mover's advantage or sell anything. We also question that why is that bad? Because it probably makes better music and allows the artist to sell. It's things like Simon Cowell putting together One Direction and turning all those buddy boys into millionaires because he made them into a band, which they otherwise wouldn't have done. That is a good thing for those artists. So even if you accept that side affirming can prove that this is the case, there's no reason why that is a negative impact, right? I've missed out on a piece of paper, so I'll be with you in a moment. Okay, we'll move on to them. What they want to do on side affirming basically is call the status quo an uneven playing field. We say that it's not any better on your side because it's still subject to things like sensationalism, to that type of thing, influencing the audience's mindset. We also say that all it is a much smaller playing field with a much smaller trophy, and there's no coach and no crowd. That's not any better on your side of the house. No, thank you. Secondly, then, on the wider music industry. The central claim here from side affirming is that the audience decides what music is good. Before I get into that, why that's not necessarily a case, we point out that that's not necessarily a good thing because local biases mean that you're probably only going to be viewing music and supporting music from local artists because that's all that's getting signed because there's not this international sale. No, thank you. You also don't get, at the very least, you don't get that large scale exposure because you don't have these giant marketing machines that exist exclusively for record labels. We also say that this is not mutually exclusive because as Janet rightfully points out in a POI, you don't actually having giant industries are trying to sell music to an audience. And therefore they are going to sell music that an audience likes. Therefore, that is the music that gets produced by these record labels. Therefore, this point does not stand. Lastly, then, to split on artist independence. Look, we think that firstly, we benefit small artists who sign into larger firms because we think the corporate machine is able to make them big. And when a record deal ends, people like Taylor Swift are now Taylor Swift, right? They now have a great future career ahead of them because that name value does not go away. In fact, the corporate scandal of maybe being slightly exploited because you lose out a couple $1 million is probably good for them in the long run because everyone wants to see Taylor Swift's comeback, right? That's probably going to be pretty massive and pretty dope to watch. Secondly, then, on how this benefits indie artists, where he explained it only matters if you are indie. Not like other girls' mentality with music only survives in this context. And thirdly, we think that giving them more time to focus on music, taking out concerns like management, is actually much more beneficial to their independence as artists. So proud to oppose. Where did I put my paper? I swear I had like.
Have you muted?
Okay, yeah, good point.
Awesome. I thank the speaker very much for their speech. I now invite up the third affirming speaker to close out their team's substantive.
Am I audible? So, what does our path to victory look like in this debate? If we can prove to you that record labels are detrimental to artists and to the music industry as a whole, then we have won this debate. So there's two main points of clash that I've identified in this debate. First of all, as it pertains to the artists. So do record labels exploit artists? And second of all, do record labels harm the industry in terms of leveling the playing field? So firstly, do record labels exploit artists? So I think here, to get an accurate picture of what this looks like on either side, we have to split this up into two worlds. A world with record labels where they're dominant and a world without record labels, right? So because these are two fundamentally different assumptions. So what does a world with record labels look like? Record labels serve as gatekeepers to the industry, right? And so imagine you're a young artist, right? You come from one of these poorer places as the negating houses tried to paint. You don't really have any other options, right? In this current world with record labels, they control access, they control all the networks, they control all the resources, all the promotional material. If you want to get on the front page of Apple Music, if you want to get on the front page of magazines, if you want to play in prestigious venues, then your only option is to sign with record labels, right?
On that point,
yes.
If you tell us that Doja Cat managed to succeed without signing to record labels, then is that statement you've made just not true at all according to your case?
Okay, and yeah, that's something I really wanted to address here, is that just because you can prove that in this world with record labels, you have potentially artists that have managed to escape that sort of mold, doesn't mean that we would not massively exacerbate those benefits in a world without record labels, right? So instead of one Doja Cat that managed to succeed despite the system, we want a world where all successful artists follow that mold, right? And so in this world with record labels, what we see is that if you're one of these smaller artists without access to all of these resources that the record label industry currently controls, your only option then is to sign with a record label. If you want to be known, if you want your name to get out there, you have no other choice, right? And so whatever terms the record label company proposes to you, they can say, well, we're going to take half your profits and you're going to be locked in for 20 years and we're going to own all the material that you put out there. And you have no other choice because they control everything, right? They have an oligopoly. It's a few small companies that control the entire market for music, and they decide who gets on the front pages of all the promotional material or the branding. And so that's the world with record labels. Now, moving on, what does a world without record labels look like? These resources are now a lot more decentralized, right? Instead of a few corporate executives controlling access to all of these resources out there, it is now open for everyone, right? So instead of the person that signed with Sony Music being on the front page of the magazines and the front page of the record labels, it's the artist that is getting the most streams organically. Platforms like TikTok, for example, don't have the sort of prioritization. And so new artists can be seen. If you can captivate an audience, right? People are going to see your stuff. It's going to be put out there. If people see your stuff, they like it, they comment on it, they share it. It gets picked up by the algorithm. It gets promoted. More and more people see it, and you develop an organic following based purely on talent. We want a meritocratic world. We want egalitarianism. We want a level playing field where everyone is starting from the same point. We don't want record labels coming in and dominating and centralizing all resources and all control in this industry. We want the people on the front page of Apple Music to be the people that captivated their audience, not the people that managed to get $1 million promotional budget from Sony Music, right? And so these are the two worlds. You can, if you try and paint this picture in a world as it currently stands with record labels, you're going to get a very misrepresented, very inaccurate picture. You have to separate these two worlds, a world with record labels and a world without record labels. And a world without record labels massively exacerbates all the benefits that we try to present on our side of the house, despite the negating house's efforts to corrupt that. And so this brings me to the second point of clash. Do record labels harm the industry overall? So record labels serve as gatekeepers, controlling access to the industry. So some corporate executive in Sony Music gets to decide which artists become popular and which artists don't. Because they have such a chokehold on the industry, the only way for a vast majority of artists to become successful is to pass through this gate. And this is where it's important to realize that these companies are for-profit companies. They have a fiduciary responsibility first to their shareholders, not to their artists, right? Who are these companies beholden to? It's their shareholders. It's not their artists. They don't work. They don't serve their artists. They serve their shareholders. Their number one priority is to make as much money as possible. And for that reason, their whole incentive structure is set up in a way that's prioritized, that's set up to prioritize who is going to make them the most money, not who is the most talented artist, right? Instead of the virtuoso with 20 years of experience, they have a much bigger incentive to prioritize the person that they can dress up and make look really attractive and put on a stage and be correct and auto-tune their music, right? You can, if you follow this process, you can make pretty much anybody famous in that way, right? And so their whole incentive structure is set up in a way where they take the people who are going to make them the most money, and we believe that these two things are completely mutually exclusive. It's not necessarily the most talented artists are not always going to be the most profitable ones, and the most profitable ones are not going to be the most talented ones. For every one Taylor Swift, there was 1,000 more talented singers and more talented artists who probably didn't look as good, but were so much more talented that didn't get picked up, that didn't get recognized because this industry maintains such a concrete chokehold on this industry, right? So what we propose on our side of the house is that by decentralizing this, we remove this fiduciary beholdency to shareholders, right? And so now it's the audience that gets to control access and decide that who gets the actual playing time, who gets the fame, who gets all the attention, and therefore who controls all of their profits, right? So instead of the veneer of choice that they have on their side of the house, we have true choice based on a decentralized model. So this brings me to some of the points that we heard from the opposing house on how do record labels harm the industry or not. We basically heard three main points from the opposing side. First of all, we heard that if record labels were truly harmful, then we would have already moved away from this industry. So if they were truly harmful, why didn't we see this and already move away from the industry? So as was characterized by the first speaker, record labels were a necessary evil all throughout the 20th century, before the information age, before widespread availability of the internet, before all these things, right? So there was no other way for you to get your for you to get your message out. And during that time, these companies consolidated power. They consolidated access to all the promotional networks, to all the talent agencies, everything, right? They consolidated access of all these resources, and they managed to maintain that grip because of their resources. If they have $2 billion in reserves, obviously no new company can come and compete with them, even though these companies are no longer relevant, right? So obviously we can't just move away from it, even if we wanted to, because of the chokehold that they have on the industry as it stands. So the second thing that we heard was that record labels have prominence within the industry, and they have incentives to find new talent because they have because they invest in these artists. But as we keep on telling you, the most talented artists, the artists that deserve to be promoted, are not necessarily the most profitable. This is this is where the whole debate comes down to. Do we want to see the artists that are most profitable, or the ones that are most talented, the most genuine, the most authentic? And on our side of the house, these are the artists that actually end up getting promoted. And the final thing that we heard, which is, I think, a bit of a more minor point in this debate, but still important nonetheless, was which side manages to get more meaningful music out there. And so under the record label schematic, we currently see that because the whole incentive structure is set up to promote the most profit, it's just the issues that are trendy. Like, for example, when the Black Lives Matter movement was trending on social media, it was popular, people were paying attention to it. That's when we got a whole ton of songs. And so what happens is only the issues that are trendy, only the issues that make money get promoted, instead of the actual issues that the artists themselves might be passionate about, right? Because the record labels own their music, they own their product, they're able to control what music gets out there. And so so it gets corrupted by the profit incentive rather than the actual meaningful message, which is what is necessary to advance true, genuine, and authentic social justice agendas. And for that reason, we believe that the mood shall stand.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the final substantive speaker of the debate, third negating.
Yes, get me your stuff that you wanted me to say.
Sorry.
Am I audible? Customary. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'd like to preface this with an examination of the key strategy on the affirming side of the house. They create a disconnected straw man where talent is not equal to profit, and they disengage with the fact of our PLY race all the way at second on how audience streams will mean that audiences necessarily lead to profit and necessarily reward talent by the profit model. When they refuse to engage with this, they lose the debate today. 2 questions for the house today. Firstly, does record labels protect artists? And secondly, does record labels improve the content of music? First question then. First headline, exploitation. Their first claim under this was that, oh, you're just losing money because somehow you're going to be giving up all of your profits. They want 100% profit, right? Let's just point out firstly that Levi already told you that, like, you get less money, right? If you get 10% of 200 million, that's still $2 million. That's still better than $20,000 when you don't have a record label to support you. But let me just mechanize more clearly, why do they get less money? 4 reasons. Firstly, the lack of connections mean that they cannot succeed. Jess already told you this, right? In terms of the fact that the entertainment industry requires subjectiveness, and so connections are crucial in terms of having a good impression of you, in terms of willing to buy you as like an artist in general, right? So when you have not enough connections, you're unlikely to get gigs, to get those deals that actually bring you money, right? Secondly, the heaviness of administration errors will mean that they will necessarily have less effort to produce good music. When good music is how they get money from audience streams, they will then necessarily also get less money because of this. Thirdly, they are not stable at all in terms of how they gain money. The model they raised you was like, oh, audience is just going to support you, like, right? Okay. Note that people like can't really donate like that much in terms of like how much money you give. This also leads to constant churning of music because you need to consistently give music so that people will be able to continually want your streams, right? You cannot, under our side, for example, have a stable corporate contract that actually gives you money. Even if you're not producing right now, you can actually still have money to like be able to do the work. The difference is that record labels provide a stable income through these contracts, even if it's 20 years, rather than an unstable job where you have a one-hit wonder and you have to rely on that. That's why so many singers that are TikTok famous go on to sign record labels, because they understand even if it's a one-time popularity, they still need to be stable with a corporate contract. The difference between us then is that we have money to put on the table. We have like long-term jobs that people can these artists can actually have time and money to be stable rather than trying to constantly churn out, and we're the side that's actually not being exploited by the state of the world that has to put them at the whims of an occasional audience. D then, the final reason is that if you have low quality equipment, you're also just not going to have as good music, right? So at the end of this, we told you that they did no weighing in terms of like what they said. Note that the second said, we're going to weigh you against like all the benefits that we get. And they provided 0 responses. All of those things still stand. And also the weighing doesn't like, they had not weighing in terms of why it's so important, and we provide you all of that clear weighing, Justin, on why this money is so important. All of those reasons contribute to why we get less money. All of those reasons add up to show how substantial of a loss the money is on their side of the house. Secondly, they also claim that you can sell branding and it's not, you don't have rights, and so that's such a bad mental harm, right? Firstly, this weighs less against money because you actually gain money. Taylor Swift, what a poor artist, net worth of $300 million, has like 10 mansions, and actually has the means to make her own music now. Without the support of the record label, there was no way that she could actually get so big and have all of this money by the mechanisms just provided to you on how record labels support artists, right? This weighs so much less against money, so we don't see that never stood in the debate, right? So next claim is that record labels control everything they do. 3 responses, yeah?
Why is it then ethically okay to send a boy from the favela through a manipulative and exploitative avenue in order for a record label to profit off of?
Okay, that's actually part of my response now in terms of like why you're not actually being that exploitative, right? Why you're not actually controlling everything they do. 3 responses. Firstly, there's public pressure, which Jess mechanized to you in terms of how these record labels are seen. If they abuse artists badly, there will probably be some sort of media attention on this. There will be public pressure. Secondly, like record labels want to keep artists happy, because if you're starved, if you're mentally unwell, you're not going to produce good music. They have an incentive, not just to the shareholders, but to the creators of their music, because those are the people that are actually giving them the income. We show you a clear incentive as to why the record label wants to keep these artists happy, right? Thirdly, even if like you're not like, even if you're not having happiness from like, not having many rights, you have the happiness of influence. You have all of these things that record labels enable you to do. And we tell you that that is so much more important, right? So they also, at the end of those, look at how we flipped all those arguments, but also note how much stuff they ignored from us. The administration stuff, the guidance stuff in terms of how they like, how we protect people, the stability, the selling of the stories that protect people, all of those reasons still stand in the debate. We're the side that actually protects artists. Secondly, then, a second major claim is on monopolies and whether we balance like the meritocracy, right? Firstly, note that they said that there are oligopolies of record labels. Note that Levi already told you that there is competition, which will mean that record labels are still competing for better treatment. Secondly, on gatekeeping, the fact that they brought up Doja Cat and then responded to Levi's question on like why, if she succeeded now, why can't she succeed later, is like, oh, they want everyone. Note that Doja Cat succeeded because she was unique. If everyone became that, they lose the allure, they lose all of the benefits on having these indie artists so successful. Thirdly, note that they never responded on the fact that we like poor artists need support because they don't have as many resources. What they have on their side of the house is that people won't be rich enough to do this because of the fact that artistry does not provide that that stable of an income, right? So at the end of this means that only the people with resources, with connections, with all of those pre-existing things will be able to do it. So at the end of this whole point, we're the side that actually protects artists. We're the side that actually provide a level playing field when record artists can go hunt down the small indie artists and actually support them. But next, let's go to the next question on, does record labels improve the content of music? Firstly, note that they like barely responded to this point. They just had some stuff on like, I don't know, like corporate, like, oh, you're going to have like social stuff is like Childish Gambino somehow just had like wasn't even signed with a label or whatever, right? Firstly, note that we already had material on diversity, how when record labels want to cater to different market shares, this will mean that necessarily more indie music, more diversity and variety of music will exist. This improves the content of music. Secondly, in terms of audience, the audience will be interested in talent anyway, so that means that, again, we improve the content of music because record labels are profit-driven, so they would want to do like new music that is interesting. Profitability does equal talent because profitability comes from audience strength. They've never responded to that. Thirdly, quality of studio again improves quality. Fourthly, in terms of popularities, if under their state, they're going to try and engage with the same formula because that's a safe one and that works. They don't have the indie stuff that we had in terms of improved content. At the end of all of this, we tell you that we're the side that actually protects the artist. We're the side that actually gives them a chance over the rich people who can just do because they have connections. So proud.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. Now, as traditional in schools debating, we will reverse the speaking order. So I ask if the negating team's leaders reply.
This is fair, right? I want to ask that stupid question.
Are you actually on
Nelson gaze.
The body thing was hovering over. I couldn't see it. Whew. Okay.
There are two key clashes in today's debate, and I feel like we on side affirming win both decisively. Firstly, is on what side benefits artists more, and secondly, is what side benefits the product of music and the wider music industry as a wider issue. Now, firstly then on artists, which I think is where most of the engagement came in this debate. And I also think both sides say clearly in this debate that artists can succeed with or without these types of record labels. We give reasons then why innovative quality artists sell and why firms have a first movers incentive to hire them, to look for and sell these people. That is one of the few groups that side affirming might have a chance of beating us. We think that there is no engagement with our material here on admin costs as well. We think that, say, playing a guitar doesn't mean that you can, deal with booking gigs, nor should you have to. That's something that we solve on our side, as we've explained to you from first. We think that it's a massive source of stress for artists. We think it's a massive deterrent for people to go in this industry. If you don't have that stable income, if you don't have the hope that a record label is going to pick you up, if you are good, if you are quality and successful, and take away the stresses of admin and those types of issues. We think that as alternative to this question is that there is no contracts, there is no stable income, there is none of these protections, and there's no support and guidance because that is more fair for artists according to their side. We don't think that is enough to win them these points because these are all benefits that we've clearly given you. What we instead hear from them is that these benefits can't be the case because these contracts are exploitative. As I challenged at second and never got any clarification on, what does this exploitation look like? They can't weigh this point against ours if they cannot answer that question. What we say is that if Taylor Swift loses a slight percentage of ownership in a couple $1 million as the absolute worst case example for us, as they clarified, that's still good because she becomes Taylor Swift, because she gets that opportunity and she gets that long-term marketability that is exclusive benefit to our side. We also question then on if these types of firms are so exploitative, why are they more likely to succeed on side affirming side? We never get any clarification here as well on why these resources become so decentralized, why this is somehow empowering local artists because they get spread out. What we hear is that online resources exist. That is not something mutually exclusive to their side. And if it is the case, it co-ops most of their material anyway on the idea that these industries are supposedly withholding all these resources and forcing artists into contracts. If you give us reasons that this is not the case, then you cannot tell us that that is the case as the main push in today's debate. That is why you lose this point. Secondly, then, on the quality of music, we're left with one question again on clarification. Why is an audience likely to recognize and value talent more? There is no reason that people are likely to care more about this more than a business that is trying to appeal to that audience. That is what we present here on our side. We think it's quite symmetrical as far as whether or not these businesses are appealing to audience. What we're left then is the question of what music is more meaningful. We think if meaningful music sells and people care about it, then record labels will promote it. We think that good music, which people care about, is harder to find when there is an even playing field, as is side affirming's best case. We give you quite clearly from the start a few reasons on why having these types of why having this type of mass promotion, this type of artist leads to this sort of exposure that leads to people paying attention to these types of industries, and we're even to this type of music. And even when this is not the case, we think that the power of brand value, the power of being an independent artist when you get a record label that elevates you as a personality, because that is authentic, that is what sells. We get no challenge here, leads to things like This Is America succeeding because people know who Donald Glover is. That is something that is exclusive to our side because of that marketing machine. When AF accepts this and does not engage with it, they lose this point quite clearly. So proud to oppose.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I now invite up the final speech of the debate, affirmative leaders reply.
Starting my speech. Oh yeah, am I muted? Oh, okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Where NEG loses this debate is when they essentially claim that more streams indicates good music, because WAP essentially is like the most meaningful music you could ever create in the history of history. We tell you that the two paths of victory that they created in this debate don't actually stand in this debate, ergo they lose this debate. Firstly, their first path to victory, which is which side better supports the individual artists. We're here to tell you that individual artists are not going to be supported on their side of the house and actually going to be detrimental for following reasons, right? We get a couple claims on the negating side of the house. We get the first claim that it gives artists an express ticket to exposure, right? We get examples like just Taylor Swift in this debate, because then that long-term exposure is going to lead to them having that comeback story, right? We tell you that, yeah, you might get that exposure, right? But when we tell you the mental health detriments that come with it, such as the breakdown and the lack of corporate support because you're not now a marketable brand, which I told you at second F and at third F, we tell you that this is not something worth sacrificing. And when we tell you that neg just essentially says your mental health doesn't matter as long as you're making money, you essentially are saying that, yeah, let's just let people kill themselves, right? Then we get a second, another response, if you don't buy that, is that resources just don't essentially disappear when we oppose record labels, right? We tell you that these resources become decentralized and shared to the public, giving everyone an equal opportunity, right? We tell you that this is something that NEG glosses over on their side of the house and doesn't actually get properly responded to. And third response to that is that those who are exposed are selected by chosen corporate people, right? We tell you that when an audience gets to choose, everyone has a chance to be able to make it big in the industry, right? We tell you that record labels shut out each other's shut out small artists when they focus on sob stories such as Taylor Swift and that favela boy that was presented at Second Negate, right? We tell you that other small artists such as Josh 865, who was picked up by a corporate label after making a really big hit, just completely disappeared off the face of the planet because they weren't properly supported by that record label, right? We tell you then with their second claim that labels create more avenues, right? We tell you that only a small amount of famous people actually take advantage of this avenue, specifically when they only mention Taylor Swift. That's the only artist that they really only could think of, such as Childish Gambino. When we tell you that there's only a small amount of artists in that pool of the amount of artists that get signed with record labels, we tell you that that avenue is so small that it's so mitigatory in this debate and actually really manipulative of small artists who are the ones who are struggling, right? We then get a third claim in this debate that 10% of 20 million is still 2 million, which is really, really good, right? But we tell you that those numbers are extremely big and extremely exemplified. We tell you that realistically for smaller artists, and this was stated in the first half, we tell you that 10% of like 200,000 is like 20,000, right? Which is still not enough to grow. We tell you that that is extremely manipulative and it would have actually been better for that small artist to get that 200,000 instead of the 20,000, right? And we tell you that their third claim that they said that even with a record label, that an audience is still able to decide who makes money, right? This is so untrue for a couple of reasons. One, audience only has the choice between a handful of artists that the record labels push, right? They do not get to see all of the potential talent in the world. And in their world, they decide that the audience decides that the artists at the top of the Spotify charts only, right? Only out of the handful pushed by record labels. We see that in our world, the audience can choose who is at the top of the Spotify charts out of all the possible artists existing in the world, right? They give a chance out of 5 artists when we tell you that we give a choice out of 500 artists in the whole world, right? We also then talked on about the stresses on the admin without a record label. We tell you that this can just easily be managed immediately at first app, that you could just get your own personal assistant. And we tell you that even so, Doja Cat, examples such as Doja Cat in my speech, were able to manage in themselves without a record label, right? Then their entire case runs on the fact that small artists cannot become famous without record labels. We tell you that this is not true and that record labels are actually an extremely detrimental avenue for for small artists, and that is why you should vote for side affirming.
Cool. Thanks everyone, and Lily, you can shut off the stream now. I'll just go away and make my decision. While I'm doing that, could both teams just put their names in the chat in the order they're speaking, just so I can make sure my ballot is accurate. Thank you.